So Temple Grandin is a professor of animal science at Colorado State University, and she's got to her credit many scientific publications having to do with animal science, but she's here for us today because she really is one of the most influential people in the world in helping us understand what is the inner experience of autism, and particularly what are the strengths that one can build on to build a career, to build relationships, and to build a way of being in life. She was portrayed by Claire Danes in a movie about Temple Grandin, and having seen Rain Man in 1988, I think her spirit and character caught on that movie has helped educate all of us in a way that could not be done in other ways. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Temple, our keynote speaker.
Well, it's great to be here. I've got to make sure I got some water open. So I've got to have that. Just think I might better start off and just talk a little bit about myself. Hopefully we can get rid of the feedback. When I was a little kid, I had all the classic autism symptoms. Fortunately, I had really good early intervention. Can't emphasize that enough. You got 3-year-olds that are not talking, someone better start working with them right now. And I have a book called The Way I See It. I'd recommend getting that book and get volunteers to work. Okay, let's just talk now about, the jobs. I understand most people in here are interested in the job front. And one of the biggest problems we have with autism is when they changed the DMS in 2013, we now have this huge spectrum that goes from Einstein, Silicon Valley, talented musicians, to somebody who maybe cannot dress themselves. And we now have the same name for all of this stuff. And this is a really big problem. Now, I've made a point in my speaking engagements to go between silos. I like to bust down silos. And they're getting hard to bust down. I'll go to a gifted conference, then an autism conference. Then I'll go out to Silicon Valley, visit the Googleplex, visit Microsoft, visit NASA, go to a cattle meeting. I was just at a cattle meeting with the ag students yesterday. Go to an education conference. I went to the big education conference in Austin. And as I go between these silos, especially on the higher end of the spectrum, I'll see a geeky little kid at a gifted conference. Then I go, and he's going to Silicon Valley. Then I see a kid at an autism conference, the same kind of geeky little kid, and he's ending up playing video games and getting addicted to video games. We've got to control the video game addictions. It's 1 hour a day of screen time, unless it's writing a paper on Microsoft Word. And I do have a book called The Loving Push I did with Deborah Moore, where we really address the video game addictions, and it is a real problem. I am one of those kids that would have been a video game addict. And I would have been playing video games instead of riding horses and doing all the shared interests. Because when I was getting bullied in high school, it was the shared interests that kept me going. Electronics, horseback riding. I know a lot of people are really into scouting. These are the kinds of activities where there's a shared interest where these kids can really excel. We've got to get more crossover between the fields. And the other thing is, looking at disabilities, there's a tendency to overgeneralize. To just say, okay, we're lumping wheelchair users and someone with an artificial leg and somebody who has epilepsy all together with autism. That's not how I think. So I think the next step of my talk is to talk about the way I think. And I originally talked about this in my book, Thinking in Pictures. And I'm a total visual thinker. Everything I think about is a picture. When I mentioned the cattle conference, I saw the cattle conference. Now I'm seeing the dairy up at the University of Provo. I'm seeing pictures. I'm an object visual thinker. I don't think in words. It tends to make me very specific in thinking. I explained to the students yesterday that cattle will get afraid of a specific place in a handling facility. Because only that one piece of equipment, maybe the squeeze chute, had hurt them. Then there's the pattern thinker, the mathematical thinker that thinks in patterns. These are people that will be engineers, programmers, Visual thinkers are going to be good at things like fixing machinery. Okay, if any machine breaks out there in that recycling plant, visual thinker can fix that, even though they might not be able to do algebra. Visual thinkers can't do algebra. I'm very pleased that here in Utah that your university will substitute statistics for algebra. I would have not gotten through college if I had to do algebra. What saved me in 1967 was finite math, which had statistics in it, along with probability and matrices. Then there's some people that think completely in words. And when you think in words, you tend to overgeneralize. And I'm seeing a lot of trouble with this with the autism diagnosis, but I'm also seeing it with this word disability. So now I'm thinking about people in wheelchairs, different specific ones, people that have artificial legs, different specific ones. And I know a guy, and he's probably retired now. He had an old-fashioned artificial leg. I knew him years ago. He'd climb up on roofs. He had a ranch. He drove. He had a good job. And there was only a few things that this guy could not do with that artificial leg. He could not run, and he could not do athletics. But boy, he did everything else. You see, and as I'm talking about him, I am now up on a ladder in my mind with him. I was on one ladder. He was on the other one. And the artificial leg was a real crummy one, and it was above the knee. And he had to like fiddle with it in the shop all the time to fix it. But that artificial leg didn't define him. And there's certain things he can't do. Running, he can't do. He can't do that. Somebody in a wheelchair is not going to climb a mountain. But then when I look at the office cubicles, I was just over there looking at the different workstations you had, that person in the wheelchair can roll right up to that workstation and work. We got to be thinking a lot more about what they can do. Don't lump them all together. You know, a wheelchair person has different challenges than someone with autism. In autism, it's a challenge with social interaction. Now, in the little book, the sensory book there that the book they gave out, it's kind of a synopsis of some of my talks. I have tips in there for bosses. Don't be vague. If a social mistake is made, you've got to pull them into the office and explain it. When I was working on my very first job, I criticized some welding as pigeon doo-doo, and the plant engineer explained to me that I had to apologize for that kind of talk. Now today, all of the cattle in the large meatpacking plants are handled in a center track restrainer system that I designed for the big meatpacking plants. In fact, E.A. Miller has one. Well, now it's JBS, but I worked on it when it was E.A. Miller over there putting in the center track restrainer system. That's a piece of equipment I developed. I think that's good for somebody, really good for somebody who thought was mentally retarded. When I was in my 20s, one of the things that really motivated me to do this is I wanted to prove I wasn't stupid. Another thing I learned is I had to sell my work. I'm a big believer of making portfolios of work. And there's a copy of one of my drawings in that book, and I'm going to have to call up Jennifer and say, you scanned that out of another book. That's not good presentation. And the next time the book is printed, I'm going to give her a better original. I didn't realize she was scanning it out of another book. Because it's very important to present the work in a really professional manner. I'd appreciate getting something to drink out of that doesn't all come apart like that. One that's stiffer. I can't even pick this up without the water all coming out. Yeah. Okay. Maybe give me this one here. The one that isn't going to fall apart when I just pick it up. Yeah. Now, why am I drinking so much water? It's because of medication I take. I had a lot of anxiety problems, and a low dose of antidepressants really controlled my anxiety. You want to read about those experiences? You can read my book, Thinking in Pictures. I have a whole chapter where I talk about that. But you see, as a visual thinker, I don't think in generalities. I'm a bottom-up thinker. Okay, I can think of different specific people in wheelchairs, different specific people with artificial legs. Oh, now they've got great ones now you can run on. But this was back in the 70s. So he had an old klutzy one. The knee joint didn't work on it. He never learned how to use it right, so he swung the leg. But this guy did everything except run and do athletics. He was the nicest person. Everybody loved him. That leg did not define him. I mean, as far as, yeah. If you're into athletics, yeah, you're going to be in trouble. He wasn't into that. He was into mechanics and fixing things. In fact, he would have been the perfect person to have on the space station because NASA wants nice people on the space station who can fix things and don't mess up the toilet. That's really important things. You better use a seatbelt on the toilet because you don't want flying you know what. It's just that simple. He's such a wonderful person. But that showed me what you can do. In bottom-up thinking, concepts are made out of specific examples. So when I think about wheelchairs, I'm seeing specific examples. Now I'm seeing another person, a lot more serious handicaps. No use of the hands, definitely picking up on emotions. She'd smile at people. She would not be able to work in the recycling plant. And then looking at something like the recycling plant, yeah, the clients you got over there, they're the right clients to be there. They can't read. That's great for document shredding. I went in there and already read 3 documents, but I won't tell you what I read. I'll keep confidentiality. But they can't read. You know, they're not somebody that's going to work at Silicon Valley. Don't overgeneralize about stuff. Talked about video games. Okay, let's look at my job history. We need to be starting young on teaching kids work skills. Let's start with church jobs in middle school. You have a lot of social events. This kid's got to set the chairs up every week. Put them up, take them down. Do the food, do something else. They've got to learn how to work on a schedule outside the home. I'm seeing too many kids getting way too coddled. I'm seeing smart kids with autism graduating from college that just crash and burn at a job because they've never had a job. You've got to get there, you've got to be on time. There's certain things that you've got to do. And I had a sewing job when I was 13. I was at my aunt's ranch at 15, 16. I took guests on trail rides. I had to wait on some tables, and I built the magic gate. I was doing carpentry work. I was cleaning horse stalls, and I was doing freelance work. Freelance is a really good way for a lot of people. You might have somebody in the autism spectrum, a little more severe handicap, but they're great artists. You can do that freelance. And there's all kinds of platforms now for selling that. We've got to get the job done. For 20 years, I would sell a job to a meatpacking plant at a large feed yard, draw it up, supervise its construction, and then you got to start it up. You got to make it work. With me, it's all about outcomes. If this bright kid that should have been in Silicon Valley is 23 years old and on Social Security playing video games in the basement, we failed. We cannot let that happen. I want to see people be everything they can be. I was out in California. I met a guy, he's in a wheelchair, spinal bifida, and when I first met him, he was a drugged zombie because he had uncontrolled epilepsy, totally uncontrolled epilepsy. They did some surgery, and that got the epilepsy under control. Backed the meds off. Turned out that this guy was a fabulous photographer. Fabulous. Loved to photograph flowers. I'm going, he could work at the big convention center at the flower show, all wheelchair accessible, show his iPad off with pictures of flowers on it. He's now teaching photography. He's had a photography show. And when I saw his work, I really encouraged him. You don't realize how good this stuff is. You know, you got to get out of the disability silo and get out into the photography silo. I want to really make a point of trying to bust out of silos and change thinking. That's one of the things that we need to be doing. And I just want to end up these short comments, and we're going to go into a ton of questions. I got to sit down before my sciatic nerve acts up. I've got a big talk I got to do this afternoon. I've got to stand for an hour. Anybody has any good sciatic nerve exercises, I'd like to have them. I can show you some of mine. But I just want to finish up. Don't overgeneralize. We've got to be looking at what they can do. You see, I think very, very specific where this type of wheelchair can go, where a fully motorized wheelchair can go. And there's this really cool power-assisted chair that works like a regular chair, but it's a power assist. You can fold it up and put it in the car trunk. That's really nice. It's European. Just look it up online. Power assist wheelchair. It's really cool. It's one little flip of the rung, and it just goes, and it's more semi-powered. You need to look into that. Let's just get into a whole lot of questions, and I want to sit down so my sciatic nerve doesn't fall apart completely, and let's just get questions. This is the best part. This is the stuff I really like to do. Well, I'll just take them off the floor unless the moderator wants to interview me. All right. Well, what? Okay. Do you have a? Let's have let's start off with a question from you. Why don't you come up and, okay, let's do that. What I want to do is to get you to think differently, because Steve Jobs is probably on the spectrum. Think differently. Einstein, no speech until age 3. And then, of course, we got great jobs there in the recycling plant for people that are not going to be in Silicon Valley. You see, this is where we got to figure out the right thing for the different kinds of people.
Let me see if I can use this, and if those are on, we can get.
That'll be fine.
Let me just briefly say, I'm Michael McKee from Bloomberg. I'm going to be the moderator, but mostly you're going to be doing the asking of questions. I'll have a few to bridge the gap, but we welcome as many questions from you as possible. I came in from a foreign country, as David Kotak said earlier, from New York. Was very glad, though, to see that the people of Utah have sympathy for the people of New York, because as I was driving in, I saw a sign that said, Salt Lake City, home of the Utes. And I thought, well, they speak Brooklyn here. But I actually sort of have dual citizenship, because I grew up in Colorado,
Okay.
and I graduated from Colorado State University. So we share something in common there, Fort Collins, Colorado, which is a wonderful town.
Wonderful, wonderful town. I've got graduate students in animal science, and they don't want to relocate when they graduate. They like Colorado.
We also want to bring into the conversation Dr. William McMahon, who introduced Temple Grandin. He is the Director of Autism and Community Outreach at the University of Utah, spent many, many years studying all of these issues. And if I could, Temple, I would like to just ask Dr. McMahon a first question, because I was reading today that the latest survey is out on the number of people with autism, and after many years of seeing increases, it's now leveled out. Is that because we saw a lot of new diagnoses, or has something changed?
Could you go to the next slide, please? So this is hot off the press, the press embargo on this article in the CDC journal, MMWR, was published today. And Utah ranks third of the 11 different sites in this CDC network. We've been part of the CDC network on and off since 2002. So the Utah, go to the next slide. So the Utah number is on below. So 1 in 58 8-year-olds in our sample here in Utah, which was around 25,000 births. 1 in 58 children have autism in Utah in our sample area. And that's slightly a higher group, higher number than the average of all those 11 sites, which was 1 in 68. But it's not statistically different. So among our population, this represents a slight decrease from what we found in the previous study. But again, that's not a statistically important difference. It's not significant. What is important, could we go to the next slide? This represents the prevalence of autism across the age span from 18 to 80. And this was based on a census tract kind of method where people in homes were accosted by a stranger knocking on their door who said, "Can I interview you about your mental health?" And depression, other things, but autism was part of it. And the figure that came out of this UK population, the United Kingdom, was about 1%. So 1% of adults living in the community were diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, and there was no difference across all those ages. There's a slight slope there, but it's not a statistical difference. It's all close to 1%. So what I want to make the point of is that we've got our estimate of 8-year-olds as 1.5. it's likely that it's going to be 1.5 when they're 18, when they're 30, when they're 40. And the work we've done here at the University of Utah, we've done a 20-year follow-up study of all the cases of autism that we had found in the period 1984 to 88. And we found a good outcome for about 20%. And most of them had jobs. Most of them had jobs that were less lucrative or below their potential. We had college graduates working in jobs that could have been filled easily by someone out of high school or not even with a high school degree. So not only is there a great lack of employment, that is great unemployment among people with autism, but there's also great underemployment. And then I think I have one more slide. So this is a picture of Angels Landing in Zion Park, and we talk about the transition cliff. So children with autism and other disabilities have educational services up to age 22, and then there's a big cliff and they fall off. And so what we need to develop is a really great system for not only training for jobs specifically, but for setting expectations in 10-year-olds that they can do things that gives them not only a meaningful job, but a way of being in the world that is not defined by their autism.
Well, I totally agree with completely agree with what you're saying, because I'm talking about a gradual transition into the world of work. When I was a little kid, I was party hostess at my mother's parties. All the kids in the neighborhood did that. That taught social skills. And when I got to be 13, Mother just found this sewing job in the neighborhood where I took apart dresses, hemmed dresses. I was cleaning horse stalls at 15, painting signs and selling them. I was out on my aunt's ranch. By the time I graduated from high school, I had a lot of work experience. And by the time I graduated from college, I had a whole bunch more. What we want to avoid is a sudden ending of school, and now all of a sudden we do work without work experience. We have got to find paper route substitutes. Boy, this needs to start big time in middle school. It can be walking dogs, it can be church jobs, it can be just stuff you do in the neighborhood. So this transition's not so abrupt.
Well, Dr. McMahon said that 20% have had good outcomes. From your experience, Temple, how much higher can that percentage go?
Oh, let me tell you, when I get out of the silo, just go check out the tech companies. They're getting paid $100,000 a year and they don't look up and they got no social skills. Then, they're there. Then I go over to the construction site where I was working on, they were building the big Cargill plant. I had designed its corral system and all, and the center track restrainer, but I was there when they were doing the heavy construction part. I walked all around on big, heavy, complicated construction. I watched millwrights and welders there. I know they were on the spectrum. Skilled tradespeople that own metal fabrication companies, even though they're dyslexic, ADHD, bad speech impediment, horrible at school, took welding, started making stuff, and built up a great business. I've seen artists that I know are on the spectrum. As soon as I get out of the silo, I see all kinds of people very successful. Now, where a diagnosis is helpful, and I have this book called Different Not Less, and another book, Unwritten Social Rules, is on their relationships. On these high-end people, I think a diagnosis on this hold them back on employment. But on relationships, that's where it was helpful. Terrible marriages, stuff like that. Girls getting abused by abusive husbands, that sort of stuff. But I've made a point of going between the silos. And people say, why don't you just do autism advocacy all the time and nothing else? I don't want to get locked in that silo. I've sometimes said, you got to approach the local cattlemen's association. And the other thing the construction industry has done to me, there's an urgency. You got to get it done. You got to make it work. If you don't have materials, we'd get on the horn and we called until we found the materials. And I don't look at the label, I look at the kid. I told one kid, I said, you're just a garden variety geek that ought to be programming computers. And we've got to get that video game playing under control. They're not having good outcomes. And they're not becoming game designers, most of them. There are a few.
Well, I want to build on that. It's easy to imagine the idea of parents of a child with autism or an autistic child working to tear down silos, but they need help from the people on the other side of the employment contract.
Well, the other thing, let me just say one other thing. I'm seeing too many kids overcoddled. 18-year-old honors student who's never grocery shopped. Basic skills that I learned when I was in elementary school, ordering food in restaurants, the tendency to always talk for the kid. Now there's a lot of jobs, you just put your portfolio out there. Your code's good enough, your art's good enough, and you put it up on the right websites, you can get hired. And when I started my cattle freelance consulting, one project at a time, I never mentioned autism. I had a very, very professional brochure, very professional portfolio. We're going to get that picture fixed in that book because that's not professional. And I've got to get a hold of Jennifer, and I'm going to send, I didn't know she was scanning it out of a book.
Well, my question is, what do you say to business people who do the hiring to get them to give people a chance to break down those silos?
Well, one of the things is avoiding HR. If it's programming, you've got to show that programming work to the techies that are going to appreciate that programming work. You know, then you get in disclosure. They're mild on the spectrum. If it's a tech field, I would just go in there and show the work off. The other thing that's a problem is for people, just about everybody on the spectrum, long strings of verbal information does not work. Okay, let's say like just set up of those machines out there. Even for me, give me a pilot's checklist. Safety rules for that machine, setup, things like that. And in a couple of weeks, I can throw the pilot's checklist away. But I'm going to need it in the beginning because there's no working memory. And don't be vague. You wouldn't ask somebody on the spectrum, just develop new software. You want to say, I want a program done on this platform, this much memory, it does this, and here's the deadline. You know, specific. That's the other thing. But some tech companies are beginning to realize that people on the spectrum really can do good work. We've got to get more showing off the work. Like, okay, Ian, in a wheelchair, this guy was a comatose blob from the amount of medication he was on. Then all of a sudden, when the surgery enabled him to get off the medication, this picture portfolio that I just saw on a phone was the most beautiful thing I ever saw. I said, well, let me say, you got a career in photography here. See, that's selling the work.
Okay, let's start opening it up to questions here. Somebody in the back had their hand up for quite some time.
And what type of education are you in? An art teacher, elementary school? Middle school, okay. Okay. And how old is your son? See, again, I don't do generalities. How old is he? 22. And fully verbal? And what kind of job has he got now? What does he do for a job now? Wonderful. That's apprentice electrician. I think that for these real high-end autistic individuals, skilled trades is probably going to be appropriate for about 20 to 25% of them. We have a gigantic shortage in this country right now of diesel mechanics, auto mechanics, airplane mechanics, people to fix stuff. Now, how's a kid going to find out he likes engines if he doesn't get exposed to them? That exposure needs to start in middle school with lawnmower engines. Well, he probably knows he has autism, doesn't he? Maybe it's better he doesn't know. And because there's no black and white dividing line between geeks and nerds and mild autism. It is the same thing. It's not, see, when you think in words, it's like discrete categories. But when you think in pictures, and I've looked at some of the genetics, you're looking at lots of little code variations, 500 little code variations. How many you have, it's like mixing paint. There's no black and white dividing line. And maybe he's going to need some counseling on some stuff being socially awkward. How's he getting along with other people? He struggles. Well, he might like to read my book on the unwritten social rules that I did with Sean Barron. And in a lot of ways, Sean and I were the same, and there's other ways where we were different. That would help him on some of the social things. But don't let you hold it back. A lot of people in Silicon Valley deny the fact they have autism, including Sheldon Cooper on Big Bang Theory. And he is classic Asperger's. Classic. Absolutely classic. And I mean, I've been to a lot of the tech companies, and the electrician comes first, the autism second. I've had so many people say to me, why don't you just quit cattle? I go, no, they come first. And I think it's really important that my professor job comes first. Class next Tuesday, I am going to be there because that's my real job, college professor in animal science at Colorado State University. And the next time you go by the E.A. Miller plant, my center track restrainer's in there. If you want to see it work, you can look it up on Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin.
All right. This lady right here.
Excuse me, JBS now. Okay. What age of kids? You're a high school special ed teacher. Now I'm going to tell you some things I don't want to see. I don't want to see a smart kid who could be a brilliant mathematician in with the nonverbals. I think it's important to try to figure out what kind of mind these high-end kids are. The visual thinkers tend to draw and be artists. It will show up. The mathematicians will be good at math if you don't bore them to death with baby math. That's a mistake that gets made all the time. Give them the harder math. And there's great visual websites you can find if you use Google Images to hunt for geometry and trigonometry and calculus. Build up the strengths. I want to work on the job skills. See, the problem you have as a special ed teacher is you're likely to get so many apples and oranges dumped in your classroom that it gets really to be a problem. You see, I've gone into these classrooms and I go, yeah, that one I want to yank him out of there. He doesn't belong there. There's a tendency to sort of fall into the labels. And I've seen kids that ought to be in a gifted program in a classroom with a more handicapped kids. I don't want to see that. You see, the spectrum's so big, they need such different services.
So when I teach the 18 to 22-year-olds now, we say,
all right, now what can these kids talk? What kind of kids have you got?
more significant,
You have the more severe ones?
but yes, they can walk and talk.
I kind of go, ICD's thinking, that's the International Classification of Diseases, thinking of going with autism categories. When I kind of say, okay, little kids, severe, and ones you can pull out of it all look the same. When they get older, you've got the kids that are fully verbal, socially awkward, have an area of strength, educational, an area of deficit. That's me. Then you got kind of a middle group. They've got speech, but it's much more rigid. And then you've got ones a lot more involved. And I want to make sure that these kids can do all their basic skills, for one thing, shopping and all that kind of stuff.
How do you get the education system from the top down to realize that in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, it's important to start teaching those skills instead of
I'd like to drag these suits out of the office. One of the problems is that they're not getting out of the office. And when you've got people that it's too top down. They need to get down and actually visit some of these classrooms and find out what's actually going on. They're not doing that enough. And I bash a lot of businesses for that.
okay, because that's an issue that we see as educators that it needs to be addressed earlier, but it's not focused on.
Well, one of the things I do is I try to get the parents to do things to stretch the kids. You got to stretch these kids just outside the comfort zone. When I was 15, I had the chance to go to my aunt's ranch, and I was scared to go. And Mother gave me a choice. I could go for a week and come home, or I could stay all summer after I got out there. And I stayed all summer. Work with the parents to try to get opportunities going. You got a great, faith community here. There's all kinds of stuff you can do to stretch these kids. There's a tendency to overprotect and over-coddle. Don't throw them in the deep end of the pool, but you got to stretch them. You got to stretch them just outside the comfort zone. I remember first times when I had to buy lumber by myself and I was really scared, but I did it. And I remember when I was working for a construction company, and my boss wanted me to get an article in Beef Magazine, and he says, you get on that horn right now and call up Beef Magazine and get our Snake River project in that magazine. And I did. I found out I could. You know what that taught me to do? It taught me to cold call meatpacking plants to get jobs.
Okay, David, you had a question?
And when you do that, they'll have a parachute. But you got to work on building that parachute long before they get to the cliff. I mean, like synesthesia, stuff like that? Well, I have completely normal vision. Let's talk about some of the sensory issues. You can have sensory issues with autism, with sensory processing disorder, head injuries, have the same sensory issues. I had problems with sound sensitivity when I was a little kid. Loud noises hurt my ears, set off a fear response. Now, sometimes you can desensitize kids if they can control the dreaded noise. Okay, like you have a headset around your neck, try not to wear it. But if you have to, you can put it on. Where they have control. You don't want to be wearing a headset all the time. It'll make the sound sensitivity a whole lot worse. Some people have visual sensitivity. And a problem that some individuals have, they can be dyslexic, autistic, sensory processing, learning, whatever, where the circuits in the back of the head that assemble the graphics file, the shape, color, and motion circuits, don't work right. And they're like a bad satellite dish shaking and the image on the picture is pixelating. Well, that's going to cause a lot of problems with your visual system and a ton of trouble with reading. Now, not everybody with autism has this problem. It's a subgroup. The sensory issues are extremely variable. One kid will have a sound sensitivity really bad. Another one may have visual problems. I have some problems with scratchy clothing. Wearing wool against my skin, I definitely do not want to be doing that. Sensory is one of the places they need to do research. But if you want to do research on sensory, you can't just lump them all together by autism. You've got to say, now, this person's got a visual sensitivity problem. This person throws a fit when there's a lot of loud noise around. This one can't stand scratchy clothing or labels or seams in their clothing. And figure out ways to desensitize it. I want to tell you one little trick with the reading, with the dyslexics. It works about 10% of the time. Ask a kid if the print jiggles on the page, and then try printing his work on colored paper. Lavender, tan, light gray, light blue, light green, all your pale colors. Doesn't work for everybody. And somebody's going to say to me, it's not evidence-based. Well, you got to remember, I come out of the construction trades and out of the cattle industry, and if something's cheap, not dangerous, it only takes a few minutes to try it, I don't need evidence-based. If it's cheap, it's not dangerous, and only takes maybe 30 minutes to try it, that's all. If something's possibly dangerous, very expensive, or extremely time-consuming to even try, then I'm definitely going to want the evidence-based. But I've seen the colored paper work a whole bunch of times. I have saved students from flunking out of school, because when I looked at their cattle corral drawings, I could tell their visual system wasn't working right. Lavender paper in the printer, saved them.
Let me bring Dr. McMahon into this and ask what progress has been made in the sensory area and what is possible.
So I've been involved in the field for 40 years, and the changes in how we think about autism have been really remarkable, and the sensory aspect of it has been one of the most stark. When I first got started trying to understand autism, the National Society for Autistic Adults and Children, NSAC, had these criteria that DSM-3 was based on that really emphasized sensory things. So I learned diagnosis by paying a lot of attention to sensory things. For example, Ed Ritvo, who was an early pioneer in the area and who helped organize the Utah UCLA epidemiology studies in the 80s, used to meet a 10-year-old boy, and after he had some interactions with him, he'd pull a nickel out of his pocket and spin it right there on the table. And he used it as sort of a probe for, does this kid like to watch spinning things? Because it's not uncommon that individuals with autism who have a visual sensory thing will watch fans or dryers or things like that. But the sensory phenomena, for some reason, got sort of hidden in subsequent versions of our diagnostic manual, and it's coming back now, and partly because I think particularly the brain imagers are paying attention to what are the characteristics of visual presentation and how does it light up portions of the brain. And I believe that Temple has been part of some of that research.
Been involved in a lot of brain scan research, but I've looked at some of the literature on the sensory, and what tends to happen, some of the people on the autism spectrum, is that the sound goes off and it lights up the fear circuits. Now that's something that's not normally doesn't happen. Now, since I've been on antidepressants since my early 30s, that's damped down the sensory stuff. It's nowhere near as bad now as it used to be. I still jump a lot more than other people with certain loud noises, but I can tolerate it.
Questions? Yes, okay.
Why was eye contact so hard? Part of it is distraction. You see, multitasking. I talked about the problem with working memory. We're all trying to look at the eyes and sometimes think at the same time. Doing two things at once is hard. Now that's gotten a lot easier for me now. But when I'm tired and there's a lot of noise at the airport and a gate agent's trying to tell me something, I got to just put my good ear towards them because this ear's lost a lot of its hearing, autoimmune problems. And I've got to concentrate on what he's saying. And if I look at his eyes, it's harder to hear what he's saying if there's a lot of noise in the background. There's some very good self-reports. Thinking in Pictures, I've got a lot of self-reports. My book, The Autistic Brain, has a lot of self-reports. Some other good self-reports from nonverbal individuals who can type independently are Tito Makapade, hey, how can I talk if my lips don't move? This is a person that, when I saw him, he looked very low functioning, but he can type completely independently. There's no way he was cute. Nobody was touching him. And he describes a world of sensory jumbling. I think you read that, you're going to get a really good idea of what some of these very, very severe sensory problems are all about.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. I certainly going to work on, he's academically brilliant, can draw, plays music. Have you got him in music? Have you got him in art activities with other students? Well, he needs to start, he's about right age for doing some little work things outside the home, doing things outside the home. They've got to learn independence and doing it gradually. Getting about the right age for a paper route substitute that he's doing not in the family. I think it's really important to get out doing things for other people. Church jobs, there's a ton of those. And somebody else is the boss. That's the important thing. The other thing about a job, Like when I got one of my first jobs writing for the Farmer Ranchman magazine, and I had the guts to walk up to the editor, just like the movie showed. That goes back to the party hostess. And I walked up to the editor, just like the movie. Doing feature articles on new dairy, that was a lot of fun. Writing up show and sale results of what bulls won the stock show, that wasn't very fun. But that's part of the job. You've got the fun stuff in a job, and you've got the grunt work that's not fun, and I'd sit there all day writing up big lists of which different breeds of cattle, won different prizes, and if I left out one breed of cattle, then somebody would throw a big fit. Show and sale results had to be accurate, but that's the part of the job that's not fun. It is called work. You see, and this is one of the things that, and he's ready for a paper route substitute. How is he doing with friends right now? A little better. Now, what is he doing with friends with shared interests, art and music friends? Because when I got bullied and teased in high school, the friends that I had were all friends with a special interest. We rode horses together. We did electronics together. We were in the Model Rocket Club. Those were 3 of my big things in high school. Scouting's a great place to do this. Is he in Scouts? And how's that going? No, he needs to go. Now, if he decides, he's got to finish out that year, and then if he decides to stop scouting, then he's got to do something else. You cannot let him become a recluse in his room. That's one thing when I went away to special boarding school that was not allowed. Also, as a young child, I was taught how to be on time, so time management was never an issue at college. But if he quits scouting, then he needs to do something else. There's a choice. You can do scouting or some other activity, but staying home all the time is not one of them. Okay.
Yes, in the red.
Like trying to make them explain how they do their math, and they can't possibly explain it because they don't think the same way. Oh, that's typical. The working memory, we have to, in engineering, we've got to do a workaround. You got to remember, I like to use the lingo of another silo. And in engineering lingo, we have to do a workaround. Working memory is a real deficit. My whole area of the brain for working memory is just full of water. We've got to do a workaround. That's why you have to do things like pilots, checklists, or allow them to use a pencil to mark down. Like I learned borrowing and subtraction the old-fashioned way where you mark it. If I wasn't allowed to mark it, I wouldn't be able to do it. But fortunately, when I was in 3rd grade, 4th grade, that's how it was taught. Working memory is one of the things we have to make an accommodation. This is like a wheelchair ramp. Wheelchairs cannot climb stairs. A lot of people on the autism spectrum, this is pretty universal, are going to have a working memory problem. Long strings of verbal information do not work, period. Pilot's checklist. Well, maybe you don't always base it on test results. If your kid's really good at art or music, I could care less about test results. I stick that portfolio out there on LinkedIn. They don't care about the test results. How old is she now? She's 19. All right, let's just look at what she can do. Can she read USA Today and tell me what's in it? Okay, that's all the reading you need for 90% of all the jobs in the world. Okay, math at the 6th grade level? All right, but when you say brilliant in math, what can she do? Okay, now, what's she got for work history? She should have some jobs by now. Okay, well, let's talk about where we're going to get her into a job now. Let's discuss that. So when she says work in technology, like what? Let's be specific. Can she program? All right, what languages does she do? They're all free. The lessons are free online. I'll tell you what's hot. JavaScript, C++, Ruby, and Python. All right, what she needs to do is start making a portfolio of the things she's made with programming and then show pieces of the code. You show that to the right tech company person on a computer forum site. Programming forum. Forum's a magic word. When you take the word forum and you combine it with other keywords on Google, it puts you into different web pages. She needs to start getting a portfolio together of code and get a job. They will not care about the test results. They're only going to care about her code. And you only put your pretty stuff in there. What you want is a 30-second wow. Now, of course, my stuff was all in paper, so I had a very nice brochure. I'd have a couple articles from a meat magazine. I'd have a fold-out drawing and a plastic page of pictures. A 30-second wow. So somebody looks at that code and goes, oh, wow, that's pretty. It only uses this much memory. What does she want to do? Let's figure out, what does she want to do? What's her dream job? Let's figure out how to get there without a master's in technology. What does she want to do? Well, that stuff you can all do online, and you put the stuff out there. This is how I sold jobs. I cold called a meatpacking plant, and I'd go, engineering office, please. And they'd say, that's Mr. Smith. And I'd go, ooh, what's his direct line extension? And then I knew in meatpacking plants, you'd call them at 11:30 when they come in for lunch. I knew every phone game there is. I know how to hack email addresses, find out how this corporation formats their email addresses. And if I find out his name, I try like 5 email addresses till I get one that works. She's really good at programming. Okay, who around here is good with computer stuff that can evaluate her work? Let's put it up online. Let's get her LinkedIn page. They're hiring. If her code actually is really good, Facebook's hiring right now. And there's a Facebook coding contest thing. I've got it on one of my PowerPoints. Something like top coder, and Facebook has a coding contest thing. You need to find out what that is. Put her stuff up on it. They won't care about her GED or anything else. You got to get the code. You got to get out of the silo, get the code, and it's got to be good. I have some people look at it before you post it. You don't want to post rubbish online. Just put your good stuff up. 30-second wow. Bypass it. It's called the back door. I have done so many things going in the back door. The other thing I found out, you need to get her portfolio on your phone, even though you may not understand the stuff. Because you never know where you're going to meet somebody. You're going to whip that out and show it to them. And they're going to go, wow, that's the prettiest job I ever saw. And what you want to have on the phone, if it's JavaScript, you want a little video there of what the end product is. And then about this much of the prettiest code. And then you follow up on, then when you send it to them an email, they'll open the attachment because they know you're not full of viruses. But I learned you never know where the person is. They will open the door, but you better have the portfolio to whip it out and show them.
I think, did you have a question? No? Okay.
Okay, you'll have to translate, please, into English what's wrong with them. A lot of sense. And how old is your youngest? She's 3. And she has this weird, unpronounceable thing that you're telling me about. Can she talk? She can talk. Lots of sensory problems. Are you working with an OT? Well, you could keep continuing it. It's not rocket science. It's real picky on the eating. One of the things that can sometimes help on that is letting her get involved with food prep. I don't like playing with food in the dining room because I want manners. But back in the kitchen, play with the yucky things she doesn't want to eat. Because sometimes that helps, and get her involved with making the things. And don't start with the things you think she just hates the most.
I want to follow up on something you were saying about careers. If people on the spectrum are anything like normal teenagers, many of them don't know necessarily what they're going to want to do. And I'm wondering, the state of career counseling, can we get the round peg to the round hole?
Let's address. I got interested in cattle because I was exposed to them in high school. I went to Fermi Lab, the big physics place. I sat down with scientists there, and then let me tell you, there's Asperger's all over that place. It's like, oh, let's go spot the messy offices. I asked scientists there at Fermi Lab, how did you get interested in physics? It was the high school science teacher. You see, one of my big concerns I'm worried about on the whole job thing is kids not getting exposed to enough career options. Art, band, skilled trades, music, but just things in the sciences. A regular physics high school teacher kids get interested in stuff they are shown. I got interested in optical illusions. I saw that in a high school science class movie, which was shown very accurately in the HBO movie. Kids get interested in things they get exposed to. And we get so hung up on test results and reading and arithmetic, we don't expose kids to enough careers to even find out, have any idea what they might want to be. Okay, go right ahead. Yeah, go right ahead.
So I consult to an employment experimental program that spends a lot of time getting to know each individual, what they like, where they're comfortable, so that then a potential job opportunity is customized to their profile of likes, dislikes, sort of non-negotiables, things like that. So I met just a year ago a young man who I had seen as a 4-year-old as part of our epidemiology study, so he's now in his 20s. He's nonverbal. And this project was trying to find him the right job, and voila, he really blossomed in a wood shop, in a cabinet making shop. And I asked the mother, well, how did you know that he was interested in that? Because he wasn't really exposed to it. She said, when he was a young boy, his grandfather used to take him into his shop. And so I think that young man could tolerate the whine of the saws, the strange textures. This is a kid who wouldn't wear anything on his head, but when he found out he needed to wear protective equipment to be in the wood shop, no problem, he did it. So I think our standard ways of assessing readiness for a job or interest in a job in skills it's not individualized enough, and I think that's where progress will be made.
I agree with you totally.
Okay, we got time for one or two more. Yes, ma'am.
Now you're working with business partners with all disabilities, not just autism, okay? That's too general. One of the things on the high-end disabilities, let's show portfolio off. I'm going to show you, like the guy I was telling you, the epileptic guy in California, you show a portfolio of some of that photography. They're going to hire him in 2 seconds to do a photography job. A lot of, showing what they can do. You see, some people have fancy skills to show off, and others don't. And I think the thing is start one business at a time, and you explain to them they're going to take longer to train, and you're going to need the written instructions, and get a success, one client, one business at a time. That's just how I started my freelance cattle handling business. I started originally with sign painting freelance, and then it went to one project at a time. And then you get to write about it in the press. Instead of you're too general, too big, one business, one project at a time. Also, if the business has a switch in management, you might have trouble.
And I think we're seeing that with some of the federal contractors and their needing to hire the same people with disabilities. So I'm hoping that
Yeah, and I kind of hate having all this disability stuff put together because I'm seeing my friend that had the old-fashioned wooden leg, and all the things that he did. That's a very big difference between him and somebody that's socially awkward. They're totally different problems.
Do we have one more quick question here? Yes, ma'am.
Where they go? I think that's for another conference. And that's the last question. I want to thank everybody for coming, and I'll sign your books.
All right, thank you all very much. Thank Dr. Grandin and thank Dr. McMahon.